The flight attendant's face turned ashen as Malcolm Washington stepped onto the plane. Her eyes darted between him and security officers surrounding his 12-year-old daughter Zoe in first class. "There's been a terrible mistake," she stammered, suddenly recognizing the world-renowned neurosurgeon whose daughter she'd just reported. Before we dive into this shocking story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. Hit that like button and subscribe to stay updated on stories that expose the everyday reality of racial bias in America. Trust me, you won't want to miss what happens next in this powerful confrontation between prejudice and dignity. 12-year-old Zoe Washington clutched her boarding pass tightly as she made her way down the jet bridge at Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport. This American Airlines flight to Boston marked her first solo travel experience, and beneath her calm exterior excitement bubbled like a shaken soda. Her father, Dr. Malcolm Washington, had arranged everything meticulously, ensuring his daughter would have the most comfortable journey possible while traveling to join him at a prestigious medical conference. "Seat 5A, she murmured to herself, navigating the narrow aisle of the Boeing 737. Dressed in comfortable blue jeans, her favorite red sneakers, and a slightly oversized Howard University sweatshirt, a gift from her father's alma mater, Zoe appeared exactly like what she was, a confident, well-raised middle schooler from an accomplished family. As she approached the first-class cabin, Zoe noticed the subtle shift in atmosphere. A middle-aged white woman in 4C glanced up from her magazine, eyes lingering a beat too long. An elderly couple in 5B and 5C exchanged whispers behind cupped hands. A businessman in 4A barely looked up from his laptop, but his fingers paused momentarily over the keyboard. Zoe had been taught to recognize these moments without internalizing them. Her parents, a neurosurgeon father and corporate attorney mother, had prepared her for navigating spaces where people might question her belonging. Head high, she located 5A by the window, stowed her backpack beneath the seat in front, and settled in, pulling out her tablet to send a quick text to her father. "Good morning," a flight attendant with a name tag reading Amber Reynolds approached her professional smile not quite reaching her eyes. "Can I see your boarding pass, sweetie?" "Sure," Zoe replied, presenting the document. "I'm headed to Boston to meet my dad." Amber scrutinized the boarding pass longer than necessary, glancing between the paper and Zoe several times. "This says 5A, first class." "Yes, that's right," Zoe confirmed politely. "Are you sure you're in the right seat? Maybe you misread your boarding pass. Economy class is toward the back." Zoe took a deep breath, remembering her mother's coaching. "I'm in the correct seat, thank you. My father booked first class, so I'd be more comfortable flying alone." Amber's smile tightened. "Let me just double-check this for you." She took the boarding pass and walked toward the front galley where she conferred with another flight attendant, repeatedly looking back at Zoe. The elderly woman in 5C leaned across her husband. "Don't worry, dear. They're just doing their job, making sure everyone's where they should be." Zoe nodded politely, though she recognized the familiar undercurrent. She'd experienced similar concerns at school events, upscale restaurants with her parents, and even the country club where her family held membership. As her mother always said, "Your excellence is threatening to some people." Trying to distract herself, Zoe pulled out her phone to call her father, but the signal inside the aircraft was poor. The call wouldn't connect. Meanwhile, the captain announced a minor delay due to air traffic control issues, meaning the plane would remain at the gate for another 20 minutes. Amber returned with Zoe's boarding pass, accompanied by a taller male flight attendant whose name tag read Gregory Patterson. His expression was stern as he towered over Zoe's seat. "Miss, we need to verify your ticket information," Gregory said, his voice carrying enough for nearby passengers to hear. "There seems to be some confusion about your seating assignment." Zoe felt her cheeks warm as several passengers turned to watch the exchange, but she maintained her composure. The confrontation was just beginning, and she had no idea how quickly things would escalate. "I've already verified her boarding pass," Amber informed Gregory, while gesturing toward Zoe. "It does say 5A, but I'm not convinced she's supposed to be here." Gregory crossed his arms, looking down at Zoe with an expression of practiced authority. "Young lady, can you explain how you ended up with a first-class ticket?" Despite feeling increasingly uncomfortable, Zoe maintained her composure. "My father purchased it for me. I'm traveling to Boston to meet him for a medical conference. He's a speaker there." A medical conference. Gregory's tone carried unmistakable disbelief. And who exactly is your father? Dr. Malcolm Washington. He's head of neurosurgery at Massachusetts General Hospital. Gregory and Amber exchanged glances that made Zoe's stomach tighten. She recognized that look, the silent communication of shared skepticism. Do you have any way to prove that Gregory pressed? Anyone could make such claims. Zoe pulled up her email app. I have the ticket confirmation he sent me and his contact information. As she showed them the screen, Amber barely glanced at it before responding. That doesn't really prove anything. You could have found this boarding pass, or perhaps there was a mistake at check-in. Are you suggesting I stole someone's boarding pass? Zoe asked, her voice rising slightly despite her efforts to remain calm. Or that I snuck into first class without anyone noticing? The conversation had grown loud enough that several nearby passengers were openly watching now. The elderly woman in 5C, who had introduced herself as Patricia Henderson earlier, leaned forward. Excuse me, Patricia, interjected, her silver hair framing a face creased with concern. This young lady has shown you her boarding pass. What exactly is the problem here? Gregory turned to Patricia with a practiced customer service smile. Ma'am, we're just ensuring everyone is in their assigned seats. It's standard procedure. From across the aisle, the businessman in 4A looked up from his laptop with evident annoyance. Is this delay really necessary? We're already running behind schedule. Sir, we're handling a seating issue, Amber replied tersely. The captain's voice crackled over the intercom, announcing an additional 30-minute delay due to maintenance checking, a minor issue. Collective groans rippled through the cabin. Amber turned back to Zoe. Perhaps it would be easier if you moved to the main cabin until we sort this out. There are plenty of open seats there. Zoe shook her head firmly. No, thank you. I have a valid ticket for this seat. There's nothing to sort out. Gregory's friendly facade slipped slightly. If you refuse to cooperate, we'll have to call security. This is about flight safety protocols. How is questioning my ticket a safety issue? Zoe asked, remembering her mother's advice about standing firm while remaining respectful. I've shown you everything you've asked for. A memory flashed through Zoe's mind, her mother sitting her down after an incident at school where a teacher had accused her of cheating on a test simply because she'd scored higher than expected. Never let anyone make you feel small, Tanya Washington had told her. Your dignity isn't negotiable. Gregory stepped away, whispering something to Amber, who nodded and picked up the crew phone near the galley. Though she spoke quietly, Zoe caught fragments: uncooperative, passenger and security assistance. 5 tense minutes passed. Zoe tried again to call her father, but the connection remained poor. Patricia Henderson offered sympathetic glances, while her husband pretended to read his magazine. The businessman had put on headphones, deliberately removing himself from the situation. Then 2 uniformed airport security officers appeared at the cabin entrance. Amber pointed directly at Zoe, and the officers began making their way down the aisle toward her seat. Several passengers had pulled out phones, recording the escalating scene. The tension in the cabin was palpable as the security officers stopped directly beside Zoe's seat. Miss, the taller officer said, we need you to come with us, please. 12 years old and alone, Zoe now faced armed security officers questioning her right to be exactly where her ticket placed her. The situation had spiraled beyond anything she could have anticipated when boarding her first solo flight. I'm Officer Brian Miller, and this is Officer James Dawson, the taller security officer announced, his voice firm but not unkind. His partner, a stockier man with close-cropped hair, maintained a stern expression as they loomed over Zoe's seat. We need you to gather your belongings and come with us. Zoe's heart hammered against her ribs, but she fought to keep her voice steady. What have I done wrong? Officer Miller glanced at the flight attendants before responding. We received a call about an uncooperative passenger. We need to discuss this off the aircraft. I've cooperated completely, Zoe protested, her voice cracking slightly. They just don't believe this is my seat, even though I've shown them my boarding pass multiple times. Patricia Henderson, the elderly woman who had been watching the situation unfold, suddenly unbuckled her seatbelt and stood up. Despite her husband's whispered protests, she stepped into the aisle. This is absolutely ridiculous, Patricia declared, her voice carrying throughout the first-class cabin. I've been watching this entire interaction, and this young lady has done nothing wrong. You're questioning her simply because she doesn't fit your image of who belongs in first class. Officer Dawson turned toward Patricia. "Ma'am, please return to your seat. This doesn't concern you." "Discrimination absolutely concerns me," Patricia replied, standing her ground. "I've been flying for over 50 years, and I've never seen flight attendants verify someone's ticket as aggressively as they're questioning this child's." The businessman in 4A, who had been deliberately ignoring the situation, removed his headphones. Zoe noticed he had begun filming the interaction on his phone. "I'm Trevor Wilson, an attorney," he announced, rising from his seat. "And I'd like to understand the justification for removing this young passenger from the plane. She's shown her boarding pass, which matches her assigned seat. What regulation is she violating?" Officer Miller looked increasingly uncomfortable. "Sir, we're responding to a call from the flight crew. They have authority over passenger seating." Zoe seized the moment to explain further. "My father is Dr. Malcolm Washington, the neurosurgeon. He's speaking at the American Medical Association conference in Boston tomorrow. That's why I'm traveling there." Amber, who had been standing slightly behind the officers, scoffed audibly. "A likely story. And I suppose your mother is a Supreme Court justice." "My mother is Tanya Washington, corporate counsel for Brighton Pharmaceuticals," Zoe replied evenly, though her hands trembled slightly in her lap. Officer Dawson shook his head. "Miss, please collect your things. We need to continue this conversation in the terminal." "Can I at least call my father first?" Zoe asked, pulling out her phone again. "You can make any calls you need to once we're off the aircraft," Officer Miller stated. As Zoe reluctantly gathered her backpack, she managed to hit the call button on her father's contact. The call connected just as Officer Dawson reached for her phone. "Dad," she exclaimed quickly. "They're making me get off the plane. The flight attendants called security because they don't believe I should be in first class." She heard her father's alarmed voice. "Zoe, what's happening?" before Officer Dawson took the phone from her hand. "You can have this back once we're in the terminal," he said, pocketing the device. Tears threatened to spill from Zoe's eyes, but she blinked them back, remembering her mother's words, "Never let them see you break." With as much dignity as she could muster, she stood and followed the officers toward the exit, aware of the many eyes tracking her progress. The incident triggered a memory from last year, her science teacher expressing surprise that she'd built the best model in the class, suggesting someone must have helped her. The same underlying message, "You don't belong here. You couldn't have earned this legitimately." As she walked toward the aircraft door, Zoe heard murmuring from other passengers. Some were recording the scene, others averted their eyes, and a few whispered angrily to their seatmates. The walk down the aisle felt endless each step, a mix of humiliation and simmering anger. Officer Miller placed his hand on Zoe's shoulder as they exited the plane, a gesture that might have appeared comforting to onlookers, but felt unnecessarily controlling to Zoe. She shrugged it off, determined to maintain whatever agency she could in this situation spiraling beyond her control. Behind her, she heard Patricia Henderson's voice, calling out, "I'm reporting this to the NAACP. This is blatant discrimination." As the jet bridge door closed behind them, Zoe wondered how her first independent travel experience had transformed from an adventure into a nightmare within 30 minutes of boarding. She had no idea that her father, miles away in Boston, was already setting in motion a response that would change everything. Dr. Malcolm Washington paced anxiously across the polished floor of Logan International Airport's arrival area, checking his watch for the 5th time in as many minutes. Dressed in a tailored charcoal suit with a burgundy tie, his professional armor, as his wife called it, he projected the composed confidence that had carried him through countless surgeries and medical crises. Today, however, that composure was rapidly eroding. His daughter's flight should have begun boarding by now in Atlanta. As head of neurosurgery at Massachusetts General Hospital and the keynote speaker for tomorrow's medical conference, Malcolm had arranged his schedule meticulously to personally meet Zoe at the airport, her first solo flight, marking a small but significant step toward independence. When his phone vibrated, Malcolm answered immediately. "Dad, they're making me get off the plane." Zoe's voice came through in a panic. "The flight attendants called security because they don't believe I should be in first class." "Zoe, what's happening?" Malcolm replied, his physician's instinct to remain calm kicking in even as alarm coursed through him. Then the connection cut abruptly. Malcolm immediately called back, but the call went straight to voicemail. His mind racing, he dialed American Airlines customer service number. After navigating an infuriating automated system, he finally reached a representative. My 12-year-old daughter is traveling alone on flight AA-1853 from Atlanta to Boston, he explained with forced patience. She just called to say security is removing her from the plane. I need to speak to someone at the gate immediately. I understand your concern, sir, but I don't have direct contact with the gate staff, the representative replied. I can place you on hold while I try to reach them. That's not acceptable, Malcolm stated firmly. My daughter is a minor, traveling alone, and someone is removing her from her rightful seat. After being placed on hold 3 more times and speaking to 2 supervisors, Malcolm was no closer to reaching anyone with actual authority at the Atlanta airport. The situation called for a different approach. Malcolm pulled up his contacts list. As a nationally recognized neurosurgeon who had treated several high-profile patients, including a state senator and the wife of Atlanta's mayor, he had connections most passengers didn't. He called Dr. Elena Rodriguez, chief of surgery at Emory University Hospital in Atlanta. My 12-year-old daughter is traveling alone on flight AA-1853 from Atlanta to Boston, he explained with forced patience. She just called to say security is removing her from the plane. I need to speak to someone at the gate immediately. While waiting for Elena to make calls, Malcolm booked himself on the next available flight to Atlanta, departing in 40 minutes using the Airline's app. He then called his wife Tanya, who was in Chicago, for a deposition. Malcolm pulled up his contacts list. As a nationally recognized neurosurgeon who had treated several high-profile patients, including a state senator and the wife of Atlanta's mayor, he had connections most passengers didn't. He called Dr. Elena Rodriguez, chief of surgery at Emory University Hospital in Atlanta. Elena, I need an urgent favor, he explained after brief pleasantries. Zoe is being removed from her flight by security at your airport for apparently no reason other than being black in first class. Can you connect me with anyone in airport operations? Dr. Washington, I've been briefed on the situation, Philip said upon answering. I'm heading to the security office now. We'll get to the bottom of this. I want to speak with my daughter immediately, Malcolm insisted. Of course. As soon as I locate her. Malcolm headed for his departure gate, still working the phones. During his rush through the terminal, he received a text from an unknown number. Dr. Washington, my name is Trevor Wilson. I witnessed your daughter being removed from the plane. I'm an attorney and believe she was discriminated against. I've recorded video. Contact me at this number if I can help. Similar messages from other passengers began appearing on his phone. The story was spreading. As Malcolm boarded his flight to Atlanta, he reflected on the countless conversations he and Tanya had with Zoe about navigating a world that would sometimes question her belonging. Despite their successful careers and social standing, they knew their daughter would face moments where her legitimacy would be challenged simply because of her skin color. What we've earned through excellence, they'll still question through prejudice. He had told Zoe once, after a country club member had asked if she was lost when she walked alone to the junior tennis courts. Now strapped into his seat for the 2-hour flight to Atlanta, Malcolm alternated between controlled fury and strategic planning. He'd spent his career maintaining composure in life-or-death situations, a skill that would serve him now as he fought for his daughter's dignity. What would you do if you were in Malcolm's position? Comment number 1 if you think he should sue the airline, or number 2 if you believe focusing on policy change would be more effective. Don't forget to like and subscribe to see more stories that explore the reality of racial bias in everyday situations. How do you think the flight attendant will react when she realizes whose daughter she discriminated against? Let's find out in the next part of this powerful story. The security office at Atlanta International Airport bore the sterile, windowless atmosphere of all institutional spaces designed to intimidate. Zoe Washington sat in an uncomfortable plastic chair, her Howard University sweatshirt suddenly feeling like inadequate protection against the aggressive air conditioning and even chillier stares. Officers Miller and Dawson stood across from her while a third security officer typed notes at a computer terminal. They had returned her phone but warned her not to make calls until their preliminary questioning was complete. Zoe had complied, but sent a quick text to her mother when Officer Miller stepped out briefly. "How old are you?" Miss Washington. Officer Dawson asked for the second time, his tone suggesting he doubted her previous answer. 12, Zoe repeated. "I'll be 13 next month. And you're flying alone." Yes. My dad arranged everything. I'm on my school break and going to meet him in Boston. Officer Miller returned with another man wearing a more elaborate uniform with a badge identifying him as Supervisor Dennis Hayes. Hayes nodded curtly at Zoe before consulting a tablet computer. So what seems to be the problem here? Hayes asked, directing the question to his officers rather than Zoe. Possible case of unauthorized access to the first-class cabin, Officer Miller reported. Flight attendants reported she was uncooperative when questioned about her seating assignment. I showed them my boarding pass multiple times. Zoe interjected, fighting to keep her voice from trembling. They just didn't believe it was really mine. Hayes turned his attention to Zoe, his expression neutral but assessing. Do you have any identification besides your boarding pass? Zoe reached into her backpack and produced her middle school ID card. This is all I have. I'm 12. I don't have a driver's license. Hayes examined the school ID, comparing the photo to Zoe's face. Washington Academy for Gifted Students. He read aloud. Private school. Yes, sir. And you mentioned your father is a doctor. He's a neurosurgeon. Dr. Malcolm Washington, head of neurosurgery at Massachusetts General Hospital in Boston. He's speaking at a medical conference tomorrow. Hayes's expression remained skeptical but professional. And your mother, Tanya Washington. She's corporate counsel for Brighton Pharmaceuticals. She's in Chicago right now for work. Officer Dawson snorted softly. Quite the pedigree. Zoe stiffened at his tone but remained silent, remembering her parents' guidance about interactions with authority figures. Stay calm, be respectful but firm. Know your rights. Hayes tapped something into the tablet. We'll need to verify this information. You can call my father Zoe, suggested Hope, rising. Or look him up online. He's published lots of medical research papers and does interviews sometimes. The door opened, and a woman in a crisp American Airlines uniform entered her face, taut with concern. I'm Sophia Martinez, Customer Service Manager. What's the situation here? Before anyone could answer, Hayes's phone buzzed. He checked the screen, and his expression shifted subtly. It's the airport director, he murmured to Officer Miller before answering. Hayes here. The conversation was brief, with Hayes mostly listening and occasionally glancing at Zoe. When he disconnected, his demeanor had noticeably changed. Miss Washington, it appears there's been a misunderstanding, he said, his tone markedly more respectful. Miss Martinez here will assist you while we sort this out. Martinez stepped forward. We've been made aware of some social media activity regarding this incident, she explained tensely. Several passengers have posted videos of your removal from the aircraft. Zoe hadn't considered that aspect. Videos. Yes, with the hashtag number #FlyingWhileBlack that's gaining traction, Martinez confirmed, looking uncomfortable. Our corporate communications team is monitoring the situation. As if on cue, Hayes's phone buzzed again. He stepped outside to take the call. Zoe took the opportunity to check her own phone and found multiple text messages from her mother. Stay calm. I'm on the line with the airline's legal department. Your father is flying to Atlanta now. Do not sign anything or admit to any wrongdoing. I love you. You've done nothing wrong. Relief flooded through Zoe at this confirmation that her parents were already working to resolve the situation. She wasn't alone in this fight. Officer Miller cleared his throat. For the record, we were simply responding to a call from the flight crew. Standard procedure. Zoe didn't respond. She didn't need to. Hayes had returned, his face now grave. I've just been informed that Dr. Malcolm Washington is currently en route to Atlanta, he announced. The airport director will be meeting him personally when he arrives. Martinez paled visibly. Dr. Washington is coming here now. His flight lands in approximately 45 minutes, Hayes confirmed, and I'm told he's already been in contact with several media outlets. The atmosphere in the room shifted dramatically. What had been an interrogation was transforming into damage control before Zoe's eyes. Martinez's phone chimed with a message that made her wince. Miss Reynolds and Mr. Patterson, the flight attendants involved, are being asked to report to this office, Martinez said. The director wants all parties present to resolve this situation. May I call my mom now? Zoe asked, sensing the power dynamics had shifted in her favor. Of course, Hayes replied quickly. Please use my office for privacy. He gestured to an adjacent door. Inside the small office, Zoe called her mother, who answered on the first ring. "Zoe, are you all right?" Tanya's voice carried the precise, controlled tone Zoe recognized from watching her mother prepare for difficult negotiations. "I'm okay, Mom," Zoe assured her, finally allowing some tears to escape. "But it was really humiliating. They made me leave the plane like I did something wrong." "Listen to me carefully," Tanya instructed. "Your father will be there very soon. Until then, remain calm and don't sign anything. I've already informed them that any statement from you requires parental consent and preferably legal representation." "They're acting different now," Zoe observed, "after they found out who Dad is." "That's often how discrimination works, sweetie. Suddenly, they discover you're human when they learn you have power or connections." Tanya's voice softened. "I'm so proud of how you're handling this. Just hold on a little longer." When Zoe emerged from the office, she found the room had new additions. Amber Reynolds and Gregory Patterson stood awkwardly by the door, both looking considerably less authoritative than they had on the aircraft. Amber repeatedly smoothed her uniform skirt while Gregory maintained a rigid posture, eyes fixed on some middle distance. The security officers had retreated to one corner, conferring in low voices. Martinez was typing furiously on her phone, occasionally casting worried glances around the room. Hayes approached Zoe. "Miss Washington, we've confirmed your father's flight will be landing soon. Would you like something to drink while we wait?" The question, so mundane after everything that had happened, almost made Zoe laugh. "Water would be nice, thank you." As Hayes nodded and sent Officer Miller to fetch water, Zoe caught Amber staring at her with an unreadable expression. Their eyes met briefly before Amber quickly looked away, her cheeks flushing. The airport's response had transformed from questioning Zoe's legitimacy to scrambling to address a potential public relations disaster. Meanwhile, Dr. Malcolm Washington's plane continued its approach to Atlanta, where a very different reception now awaited his arrival. Dr. Malcolm Washington strode through Atlanta International Airport with the focused intensity that had become his trademark in operating rooms across the country. His 6'2" frame, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit, despite the hastily booked flight, commanded attention from passengers who instinctively moved aside as he passed. Flanking him were Raymond Phillips, the airport's operations director who had met him at the gate, and Caroline Huang, American Airlines regional manager who had been summoned from a meeting across town. "Dr. Washington, I want to personally apologize for this unfortunate incident," Huang said, struggling to match his rapid pace. "We're conducting a full investigation into—" "Save the corporate speak," Malcolm cut in, his voice controlled but carrying an undercurrent of tightly leashed fury. "My 12-year-old daughter was publicly humiliated and removed from her rightful seat by your staff. I'm not interested in apologies until I see her." Phillips directed them toward a security corridor, using his badge to access restricted areas that would expedite their journey to the security office. As they walked, Malcolm noticed other airport employees recognizing him, some from his appearances on medical documentaries, others perhaps from his feature in last month's issue of National Medical Journal. "Your daughter is safe," Dr. Washington Phillips assured him. "I've been in contact with Security Supervisor Hayes, who's with her now. Safe, but detained for committing the crime of flying while Black Malcolm," replied. The comment silenced both administrators as they hurried through the terminal. They rounded a corner and approached a door marked Airport Security Operations. Phillips scanned his badge and the door swung open to reveal a scene that caused Malcolm's carefully maintained composure to falter momentarily. Zoe sat in a plastic chair in the center of the room, surrounded by security personnel and airline staff. When she spotted her father, she jumped to her feet, her face crumpling with relief. "Dad." 3 long strides brought Malcolm across the room where he enveloped his daughter in a protective embrace. He felt her shoulders shake slightly and pulled back to look into her eyes. "Are you all right?" he asked quietly. Zoe nodded, wiping quickly at her eyes. "I'm okay. Just angry." Malcolm smiled grimly, recognizing his wife's influence in those words. He turned to face the room, keeping one arm around Zoe's shoulders. The effect of his presence was immediate and palpable. Security Supervisor Hayes stepped forward, hand extended. "Dr. Washington, I'm Dennis Hayes. There's been a misunderstanding that we're working to— There was no misunderstanding, Malcolm interrupted, ignoring the offered hand. My daughter had a valid first-class ticket. She was in her assigned seat. The only misunderstanding was your staff's assumption that she didn't belong there. His gaze swept the room until it landed on two uniformed flight attendants standing near the wall. The female attendant, her name tag reading Amber Reynolds, visibly paled when Malcolm's eyes met hers. Beside her, Gregory Patterson straightened his already rigid posture. "You must be the flight attendants who decided my daughter was suspicious," Malcolm stated, his voice carrying the precision he used when addressing medical students. "I'd like to hear your justification for having her removed from the plane." Amber's mouth opened and closed without producing sound. Gregory stepped forward slightly. "Sir, we have protocols for verifying passenger identities, and—" "Protocols?" Malcolm raised an eyebrow. "Does your protocol include removing paying passengers from their assigned seats when their appearance doesn't match your expectations of who belongs in first class?" Caroline Huang intervened. "Dr. Washington, we're taking this incident very seriously. Miss Reynolds and Mr. Patterson have been temporarily removed from flight duties pending our investigation." "That's a start," Malcolm acknowledged coldly. "But I'd like to return to the aircraft with my daughter now. I assume her seat is still available, or has someone more appropriate-looking been assigned to it?" The barb landed precisely as intended. Huang winced visibly. "Of course her seat is available," she assured him. "The flight has been held at the gate. We can escort you both there immediately." "That's a start," Malcolm acknowledged coldly. "But I'd like to return to the aircraft with my daughter now. I assume her seat is still available, or has someone more appropriate-looking been assigned to it?" As they prepared to leave, Malcolm paused in front of Hayes. "I want copies of all security footage and reports related to this incident sent to my attorney." "Yes, sir. We'll cooperate fully," Hayes replied. The walk back to the gate took on the atmosphere of a procession, with Phillips and Huang leading the way, while Malcolm and Zoe followed security personnel trailing behind. Amber and Gregory were instructed to return to airline offices rather than the aircraft. As they approached the jet bridge, Malcolm squeezed Zoe's shoulder gently. "Ready to go back on board?" Zoe took a deep breath. "Yes, but everyone will be staring." "Let them," Malcolm replied. "We have nothing to be ashamed of." The captain himself waited at the aircraft door, his face a mask of professional concern. "Dr. Washington, Miss Washington," he began on behalf of American Airlines, "I want to extend my deepest apologies. We're ready for departure as soon as you're settled." Malcolm nodded curtly as they stepped onto the plane. Just as Zoe had predicted, every passenger's eyes tracked their progress down the aisle. Some quickly looked away when Malcolm's gaze met theirs, while others offered sympathetic smiles or nods of solidarity. When they reached row 5, Patricia Henderson stood up from her seat across the aisle. "Dr. Washington," she said, extending her hand. "Patricia Henderson, I tried to intervene when they were questioning your daughter. This was handled abominably." Malcolm shook her hand. "Thank you for speaking up, Miss Henderson." "Not enough of us did," she replied, casting a pointed glance around the cabin. "My own grandchildren are biracial. They experience this kind of thing far too often." From across the aisle, Trevor Wilson rose from his seat. "Dr. Washington, I recorded the incident. I've already sent the video to your email. One of the flight attendants mentioned your name while they were questioning Zoe, so I looked you up. I'm an attorney, and I believe what happened constitutes clear discrimination." "I appreciate that, Mr. Wilson," Malcolm said, noting how the businessman seemed almost apologetic. "Did you speak up during the incident?" Wilson had the grace to look uncomfortable. "Not until they called security." "I should have said something sooner." Malcolm nodded, acknowledging both the admission and its implicit message. Many people recognize injustice, but wait until it's safe to intervene. Once seated beside Zoe, Malcolm declined the flight attendant's offer of pre-flight beverages. Instead, he addressed the cabin in a voice accustomed to commanding attention in lecture halls and operating theaters. "For those who spoke up when my daughter was being discriminated against, thank you. For those who recorded the incident, providing evidence of what occurred, thank you. And for those who sat silently watching a child being treated unjustly because of assumptions based on her race, I hope this serves as a moment for reflection." A hushed silence fell over the cabin. Some passengers nodded in agreement. Others shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Malcolm continued. "This isn't an isolated incident. It's part of a pattern that forces people of color to constantly justify their presence in spaces others take for granted. My daughter did nothing wrong today, yet she was humiliated and detained. Remember that the next time you witness someone being questioned simply for existing in a space where others assume they don't belong. The captain's voice came over the intercom announcing immediate departure. As the plane began pushing back from the gate, Malcolm's phone rang, Tanya calling for an update. "We're on the plane," he informed her. "Zoe's fine. Shaken but handling it with your strength." And the airline, Tanya asked her attorney's instincts, focusing on accountability. "Damage control mode. We'll discuss options when I get home." After ending the call, Malcolm noticed Zoe watching him with a thoughtful expression. "What are you thinking?" he asked softly. "That they only stopped because of who you are," she replied. "What about kids whose parents aren't famous doctors or lawyers?" Malcolm felt a surge of pride at her insight. "That's exactly why we can't let this go. This isn't just about what happened to you today." As the plane accelerated down the runway, Malcolm reflected on how his daughter's first solo flight had become an unwanted lesson in the reality of navigating the world as a young black woman. The power dynamics had shifted dramatically upon his arrival, but he remained acutely aware that many others faced similar situations without the protection his status afforded. The aircraft lifted into the sky, leaving Atlanta behind, but carrying the weight of what had transpired into the wider world, where the incident was already gaining attention on social media and beyond. As the plane reached cruising altitude, a subtle but distinct shift in atmosphere settled over the first-class cabin. The replacement flight attendants, hastily assigned after Amber and Gregory were removed from duty, moved with careful attentiveness around Zoe and Malcolm, their professional smiles tinged with evident anxiety. Captain James Ellison emerged from the cockpit during meal service, making his way directly to 5A and 5B. He stopped beside their row, his captain's hat tucked formally under his arm. "Dr. Washington, Miss Washington," he began, his voice pitched low enough to provide a semblance of privacy. "I wanted to personally apologize for your experience today. What happened was inexcusable and does not reflect our company's values." Malcolm regarded him evenly. "Captain, I appreciate you coming to speak with us directly. However, I'm more interested in systemic changes than individual apologies at this point." The captain nodded solemnly. "Understood, sir. I've submitted my own incident report emphasizing the inappropriate conduct by the removed crew members. The company has informed me they're taking immediate steps to address this situation at an organizational level." After the captain returned to the cockpit, Patricia Henderson leaned across the aisle. "They're terrified of the publicity," she observed candidly. "My grandson had a similar experience on a different airline last year. The difference is, he isn't the son of a prominent neurosurgeon, so all we got was a form letter apology." "That's exactly why we can't let this end with just an apology to us," Malcolm replied. "The problem is systemic." Patricia smiled approvingly. "My late husband was active in the civil rights movement. He always said privilege comes with responsibility to create paths for others." "Wise words," Malcolm agreed. From across the aisle, Trevor Wilson removed his headphones. "Dr. Washington, I hope you don't mind my overhearing. I've received several messages from other passengers who recorded the incident. They're willing to share their footage if needed for any action you decide to take." Malcolm nodded his thanks, increasingly aware that this incident was rapidly expanding beyond a personal affront to his daughter. His phone buzzed with a notification the airline's CEO had emailed, requesting a call at Malcolm's earliest convenience. Beside him, Zoe had been unusually quiet. "You okay?" Malcolm asked softly. "I'm processing," she replied, using one of her mother's favorite phrases. "I keep thinking about how differently this would have gone if you weren't you." Malcolm squeezed her hand. "That's exactly what we need to address. This shouldn't require having a famous parent. To be treated with basic dignity." "Are we going to sue them?" Zoe asked. Malcolm considered the question. "That's one option. But lawsuits often end with confidential settlements that don't create real change. We need to think about what would actually improve things for everyone, not just secure compensation for ourselves." The lead flight attendant approached with a tablet. "Dr. Washington, our customer relations team, has processed compensation for both your tickets and added premium status to your accounts. They're asking if this resolution is satisfactory." Malcolm's expression remained measured. Please inform your team that financial compensation isn't my primary concern. I'll be discussing appropriate responses with the CEO directly. As the attendant retreated, Malcolm noticed several passengers surreptitiously watching their interaction. Some quickly averted their gaze when he looked in their direction, while others nodded in solidarity. Patricia leaned over again. Your restraint is admirable. I'd be raising hell. Oh, I'm furious, Malcolm admitted quietly. But I learned long ago that expressing that fury as a black man rarely serves my objectives. Strategic response accomplishes more than emotional release. Zoe looked up from her book. Mom would say you're playing chess while they're playing checkers. Malcolm smiled at the reference to one of Tanya's favorite expressions. Exactly. And speaking of your mother. He glanced at his phone, which was buzzing again with Tanya's call. After a brief conversation updating his wife, Malcolm noticed an email notification from the medical conference organizers. They'd heard about the incident, news was spreading faster than he'd anticipated, and were offering to adjust his keynote slot if needed. Malcolm forwarded the email to his assistant, with instructions, no schedule changes necessary. However, inform the organizers I'll be modifying my presentation to address equity issues in healthcare, including today's incident as a case study. As the plane began its descent into Boston, Malcolm opened his laptop to review his original presentation slides. What had been a technical discussion of advances in neurosurgical techniques would now incorporate a powerful real-world example of how bias operates in everyday interactions and the medical implications of such chronic stressors on communities of color. The captain's voice announced their final approach. Malcolm saved his revised outline and closed the laptop. What happens when we land? Zoe asked. There will likely be some media attention, Malcolm warned. Someone from the airline will probably meet us at the gate. Are you comfortable with that, or would you prefer we try to avoid it? Zoe considered the question with a maturity that made Malcolm's heart ache with pride and sadness, simultaneously pride in her thoughtfulness, sadness that circumstances had forced such early wisdom upon her. I don't want to hide, she decided. That would make it seem like we did something wrong. When the aircraft touched down at Logan International Airport, the flight attendant's voice came over the intercom. Ladies and gentlemen, as we taxi to our gate, we ask that you remain seated until the seatbelt sign is turned off. We'd also like to thank you for your patience during today's delay. As predicted, airline representatives were waiting at the gate when they deplaned. What Malcolm hadn't anticipated was the small cluster of reporters with cameras and microphones standing just beyond the secured area. Dr. Washington called out a woman holding a microphone with a local news logo. Can you comment on the incident involving your daughter on today's flight from Atlanta? Malcolm placed a protective arm around Zoe's shoulders as they approached the media presence. I'll provide a brief statement, then we'll be continuing to our destination. The cameras pointed toward them as Malcolm spoke with the measured clarity that had made him an effective communicator in medical settings. Today, my 12-year-old daughter experienced what many people of color face regularly. The assumption that she didn't belong in a space she had every right to occupy. The response from airline staff escalated a non-issue into a humiliating and traumatic experience. While I appreciate the company's apologies, this reflects a broader societal problem that requires systemic solutions, not just individual accountability. That's all for now. Thank you. As they walked away from the impromptu press conference, Zoe looked up at her father. That was good. Short but powerful, like Mom would say. Malcolm smiled. I've learned from the best. Now let's get to the hotel. I have a presentation to revise, and you have some rest to catch up on. In the taxi to their hotel, Malcolm's phone buzzed with notifications from social media accounts he rarely checked. The hashtag number #FlyingWhileBlack was trending, with thousands sharing similar experiences of being questioned or challenged while occupying spaces others assumed they shouldn't. What had begun as a personal humiliation for Zoe was transforming into a national conversation about the everyday indignities faced by people of color and the rare occasions when those with power were forced to confront their biases directly. The following morning, Zoe sat in the back of the auditorium at the Boston Convention Center watching her father take the stage for his keynote address. The enormous room was filled to capacity with medical professionals from across the country, many of whom had already heard about the incident through news reports or social media. Dr. Malcolm Washington adjusted the microphone and surveyed the audience. Instead of beginning with his planned introduction on neurosurgical innovations, he placed a single image on the massive screen behind him, a brain scan with certain areas highlighted in bright colors. "This," he began, his voice carrying throughout the hushed room, "is what happens in the human brain when a person experiences discrimination. These highlighted regions show increased activity in the amygdala and other areas associated with stress response. What you're seeing is the neurological impact of bias." He clicked to the next slide, a photograph of Zoe sitting in her first-class airplane seat taken before the confrontation began. "Yesterday, my 12-year-old daughter was removed from her rightfully purchased first-class seat and detained by airport security because airline staff couldn't believe she belonged there. Their assumptions about who deserves certain spaces nearly caused my child to miss this conference where I'd planned for her to see her father speak about medical advancements." A murmur rippled through the audience as Malcolm continued, seamlessly connecting the personal incident to the professional topic at hand. As medical professionals, we often discuss health disparities in communities of color without fully acknowledging the daily stressors that contribute to those disparities. The physiological toll of constantly having to justify your presence, prove your credentials, or endure suspicion is measurable and cumulative. For the next 40 minutes, Malcolm delivered a masterclass in weaving personal narrative, with scientific data elevating what could have remained an isolated incident into a compelling case study on the health impacts of systemic racism. The standing ovation that followed lasted nearly 2 minutes. As attendees filed out, many stopped to introduce themselves to Zoe, expressing both outrage at her experience and admiration for her composure. Several young medical students of color specifically thanked her for her bravery, sharing that they'd faced similar situations on their own journeys. Outside the convention center, reporters waited to speak with Malcolm, this time prepared for the media presence. He and Zoe provided more detailed statements. Video clips of their interviews quickly spread across news platforms and social media. By evening, American Airlines had released an official statement announcing an immediate review of their customer interaction policies and the implementation of mandatory bias training for all customer-facing staff. The statement specifically referenced the incident, offering a public apology to Zoe and Malcolm Washington. Meanwhile, in Atlanta, Amber Reynolds and Gregory Patterson received formal notices of suspension pending further investigation. The airline's Human Resources Department had scheduled meetings with both employees to discuss the incident and determine appropriate disciplinary actions. The following day, Zoe returned to her middle school in Boston, where news of the incident had already circulated among students and faculty. Her English teacher, Miss Daniels, suggested Zoe might want to write about her experience for the school newspaper. "Your perspective could help other students understand these issues on a personal level," Miss Daniels explained, "but only if you feel comfortable sharing it." Zoe considered the proposal seriously. "I think I would like to write about it," she decided. "Not just what happened, but how it connects to bigger patterns." At home that evening, Malcolm and Tanya discussed their next steps while Zoe worked on her article upstairs. The airline's legal team reached out again. Tanya reported, setting aside her laptop. "They're practically begging us not to pursue legal action. They've offered a substantial settlement with no confidentiality clause, plus commitments to policy changes." Malcolm leaned back in his chair. "What do you think?" As an attorney, not just as Zoe's mother, Tanya considered the question carefully. "Legally, we have a strong case. The evidence is overwhelming with multiple witness statements and videos. But litigation is exhausting and could drag on for years, putting Zoe through repeated questioning and depositions. And the alternative? Work with them on meaningful policy reforms," Tanya suggested. "Use this moment of leverage to create systemic changes. Demand a seat at the table when they're developing new training and protocols." Their discussion was interrupted by the doorbell. Patricia Henderson, the elderly woman who had spoken up for Zoe on the plane, had taken Malcolm up on his invitation to visit while she was still in Boston. "I hope I'm not interrupting," Patricia said as Malcolm welcomed her into their home. "I just wanted to check on Zoe and bring her something." Zoe came downstairs to greet their visitor, smiling when Patricia presented her with a small package. "It's a journal," Patricia explained as Zoe unwrapped it. "When my granddaughter experienced something similar, writing helped her process the emotions." The blank pages are yours to fill with whatever this experience brings up for you: anger, insights, hope. Later that evening, after Patricia had departed, Malcolm received a call from Trevor Wilson, the businessman who had recorded the incident. "Dr. Washington, I've been reflecting on my own hesitation to intervene until it was almost too late," Trevor explained. "I've decided to offer pro bono legal support to anyone facing similar discrimination who doesn't have your resources or platform. If you hear of cases where I might help, I'd appreciate the referral." As the days passed, the incident's ripple effects continued to spread. Other airlines announced reviews of their own policies. The NAACP issued a travel advisory specifically addressing discrimination in first-class and business-class cabins. Several Black celebrities shared their own experiences with the #FlyingWhileBlack hashtag, further amplifying the conversation. Zoe's article for the school newspaper titled "More Than Just a Seat" was picked up by the Boston Globe, which published it as a guest opinion piece in their Sunday edition. Her thoughtful reflection on the experience resonated with readers across various demographics, prompting hundreds of supportive emails and letters. 3 weeks after the incident, Malcolm and Tanya sat down with American Airlines executives and diversity consultants to review proposed policy changes. Zoe joined for part of the meeting, offering her perspective on how the situation could have been handled differently. "What struck me most," she told the hushed conference room, "wasn't just being questioned about my seat. It was how quickly the situation escalated, from skepticism to security intervention, with no one considering how that would impact a 12-year-old traveling alone." The airline CEO nodded solemnly. "Your insight is invaluable, Zoe. We're committed to ensuring this doesn't happen to another child or adult on our flights." The Washington family's decision to leverage the incident for structural reform rather than purely personal compensation had transformed a moment of discrimination into a catalyst for meaningful change. While no single incident could eliminate entrenched biases, the conversation had shifted from whether such discrimination occurred to how institutions could actively prevent it. As Malcolm remarked in a follow-up interview with a national news program, the goal isn't just accountability for one incident, but creating systems where these incidents become increasingly rare. "My daughter shouldn't have to be a neurosurgeon's child to be treated with basic dignity and respect." 3 months after the incident that had transformed a routine flight into a national conversation about racial bias, Zoe Washington sat confidently at a large conference table in American Airlines corporate headquarters. Beside her, Malcolm and Tanya listened as their daughter addressed the assembled executives, diversity consultants, and policy specialists. "I believe youth travelers should receive clear information about their rights when flying alone," Zoe explained, referencing the neatly organized presentation she had prepared. "There should be a designated youth advocate available at major airports and specific training for flight attendants on interacting with minors traveling solo." The airline's CEO, Martin Brooks, nodded approvingly. "These are excellent suggestions, Zoe. We're incorporating them into our comprehensive policy revisions." What had begun as a traumatic experience had evolved into something transformative, not just for Zoe and her family, but for the airline industry and beyond. The Washington family had declined a financial settlement in favor of a partnership role in developing new anti-discrimination protocols and training programs. "We've implemented mandatory bias recognition training for all customer-facing staff," reported Diane Chen, the newly appointed Chief Diversity Officer. "The program includes specific scenarios drawn from real incidents with emphasis on questioning assumptions about who belongs in premium spaces." Tanya, bringing her corporate attorney's precision to the discussion, reviewed the updated complaint procedures. "I appreciate the simplified reporting system and the commitment to timely investigation. The transparency in tracking resolution outcomes is particularly important." After the meeting, Martin Brooks handed Malcolm an envelope. "This arrived yesterday. I thought you might want to see it." Inside was a handwritten letter from Amber Reynolds, the flight attendant whose actions had initiated the incident. Malcolm read it silently before passing it to Tanya and Zoe. Inside was a handwritten letter from Amber Reynolds, the flight attendant whose actions had initiated the incident. Malcolm read it silently before passing it to Tanya and Zoe. The Washington family's approach to the incident had evolved considerably from those first heated moments. Rather than focusing solely on individual accountability, they had established the Washington Foundation for Equity in Public Spaces, using a portion of Malcolm's speaking fees and Tanya's pro bono legal hours to address discrimination in service industries. Zoe had become an unexpected youth spokesperson, speaking at several schools about recognizing and addressing everyday racism. Her maturity and articulate analysis impressed adults and resonated with peers who had experienced similar situations but lacked her platform to address them. Patricia Henderson, the elderly passenger who had spoken up on the plane, had accepted an invitation to join the Foundation's advisory board, bringing her perspective as both a witness to discrimination and a grandmother to biracial children navigating similar challenges. Trevor Wilson, the businessman who had initially hesitated to intervene, had kept his promise to provide legal support for similar cases. He was currently representing 3 families experiencing discrimination in transportation and accommodation settings cases that might otherwise have gone unaddressed due to financial constraints. Inside was a handwritten letter from Amber Reynolds, the flight attendant whose actions had initiated the incident. Malcolm read it silently before passing it to Tanya and Zoe. "Dr. Washington, Mrs. Washington," he acknowledged nervously. "Zoe, I've been hoping to apologize in person. I followed protocol without questioning the assumptions behind it. I'm doing better now, thanks partly to the training your family helped develop." Malcolm nodded, appreciating the gesture without offering absolution. "The work continues for all of us," he replied simply. 2 days later, Zoe prepared to board another flight, this time to Chicago, where she would join her mother for a weekend visit with relatives. Malcolm accompanied her to the gate, though she had insisted she could manage independently. "Dad, I'll be fine," she assured him, adjusting her backpack. "I know my rights now, and so do they." She nodded toward the gate agents who had been informed of her arrival. As passengers began boarding, Malcolm embraced his daughter. "Call me when you land." "I will," Zoe promised. "Love you, Dad." Malcolm watched as Zoe handed her boarding pass to the gate agent who checked it with a professional smile and wished her a pleasant flight. When Zoe disappeared down the jet bridge, Malcolm remained at the window, watching until the aircraft pushed back from the gate. On board, Zoe settled into her first-class seat, a deliberate choice by her parents, refusing to let one bad experience dictate future decisions. The flight attendant, a woman named Sarah, approached with a warm smile. "Welcome aboard, Miss Washington. Can I get you a beverage before takeoff?" The normalcy of the interaction, being treated with the same courtesy as any other passenger, represented both the smallest and most significant victory. As the plane accelerated down the runway, Zoe opened the journal Patricia had given her, turning to a fresh page. She had filled nearly half the book with reflections on her experience and ideas for the Foundation's future initiatives. Today's entry would focus on moving forward without forgetting the lessons of the past. Across the aisle, an elderly gentleman noticed her writing. "First time flying alone?" he asked kindly. Zoe smiled. "No, but it's my first time speaking at a youth leadership conference about our foundation's work." "A foundation? At your age, that's impressive." "It started after an incident on a flight," Zoe explained. "My family decided to turn a negative experience into positive change." As Zoe described the Foundation's mission, the passenger listened with growing interest. By the time she finished, several nearby passengers had joined the conversation, sharing their own experiences and asking how they could support the initiative. What had begun with a flight attendant's biased assumption had transformed into a movement for respect and dignity that extended far beyond one family or one airline. The journey from victim to advocate had been challenging, but as Zoe looked around at the engaged faces of her fellow passengers, she recognized the power of speaking up, not just for herself, but for everyone who deserved to occupy their rightful space, without question. The incident would always be part of her story, but it no longer defined her experience. Instead, it had become the catalyst for growth, education, and meaningful change, proof that even painful moments could lead to powerful transformation when approached with courage and purpose. This powerful story teaches us that racial discrimination occurs in everyday spaces, where people of color are questioned simply for existing in areas others assume they don't belong. The Washington family's response demonstrates that individual incidents can become catalysts for systemic change when addressed strategically rather than reactively. It highlights how privilege can be leveraged to create pathways for those without the same resources or platform. The story shows that true resolution isn't just about personal vindication, but about transforming painful experiences into meaningful reform. It reminds us that speaking up as witnesses is crucial. Silence only perpetuates injustice. Most importantly, it reveals how young people like Zoe can transform from victims to advocates, using their voices to create spaces where everyone is treated with the dignity and respect they deserve without having to prove they belong. Have you ever witnessed racial discrimination and wondered what you should do? Share your experience in the comments below and tell us how you responded. Or how you wish you had. If Zoe's journey from victim to advocate inspired you, hit that like button to help more people see this important story. Subscribe to our channel for more powerful racism stories that expose everyday bias and celebrate those fighting for change. Don't forget to share this video with someone who might need to hear that their voice matters in creating a more just world. Thank you for watching. And remember, when we stand up for others, we create the world we all deserve to live in.